So welcome everybody to the TERMIS SYS Europe interviews with a scientist. These interviews, we want to briefly portray the variety of profiles of young scientists in the TERMIS community. Today we have Meadhbh Brennan. Welcome, Meadhbh.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for inviting me to discuss with you guys today.
So we wanted first to ask you if you could guide us a bit through your CV and how has been your research trajectory so far.
Sure, yeah. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. I did my undergraduate in biomedical engineering in NUI Galway in Ireland. And then so after that, I did a PhD also in biomedical engineering in the University of Southampton. So that was focused on bone mineralization during osteoporosis, and that was under the supervision of Professor Leisha McNamara. And then so after my PhD, I did a postdoc in Nantes in INSERM in France. So that's the National Institute of Health and Medical Research. And so I worked there under the mentorship of Professor Pierre Leroux. And so he was directing at the time a large-scale European project. And so I was lucky to join that. And that was excellent experience insofar as I was obviously based in the research lab, but the whole consortium comprised of different partners from like other research labs in different European countries, but also like companies, so established companies and startup companies. There was also GMP facilities and then also hospitals. And the whole goal of that project was to perform clinical trials using mesenchymal stromal cells, or MSCs, together with biomaterials to reconstruct large bone defects in patients. And so obviously we had to do all of the preclinical work as well. So for me, it was excellent to see how in one project, how my work in the lab, in vitro and then also in vivo, so from the stage of discovery right through to the clinic to see this translation. So that was an excellent experience as well. And then together, both my experience from my PhD and then also my postdoc, after that, that led me to a Marie Curie fellowship in the US. So it's a global fellowship, so it allows you to go outside of Europe for a number of years and then come back to Europe to finish off your research. And so for that, I went to Professor David Mooney's lab in Harvard. And there I focused on more the secretome of the MSCs. So again, looking at the therapeutic potential of MSCs and also their immunomodulatory properties. And I also worked there with Professor Zandra Brakefield in MGH, also in, she's in Boston as well. And that was, I learned a lot about extracellular vesicles in her lab, which are part of the MSC secretome. So that brought me then to the beginning of 2021. So that's when I finished my Marie Curie, so about March time. And then in April, I started my current position. So that's, I started in NUI Galway. So we're on the west coast of Ireland. And I'm a senior lecturer in biomedical engineering and regenerative medicine. So that's like a co-appointment between the School of Medicine and also the School of Engineering. And so that's where I am at the moment. So I started in April, so during lockdown. So things are getting started, but so far I will be, like, my job obviously will comprise lecturing, so teaching, and that'll commence in the next few years. But my role is primarily focused on research. So until now, I've been focused on starting up my group. So that entailed a lot of recruitment. So for PhD students, for postdocs and research assistants. And then also, of course, procurement, budgeting, a lot of administration that comes along with that. But I'm happy to say that even in spite of COVID, we're all set up now. We're starting our experiments, and I've got an excellent team together.
Well, thank you very much. We want to know a bit more about your PI life. So how are you managing your group at the moment? How do you have weekly meetings? Do you have regular meetings with your students? And how are you envisioning to progress with the organization of the lab? So for example, are you using new tools to communicate? I don't know, Slack, Trello, whatever, new tools, especially during the pandemic, since you kind of started the lab during this difficult times.
Sure. So at the moment, we have our weekly meetings every second week. I guess if the group gets much larger, we may progress to every week, but at the moment it's every second week. And then I meet each of the PhD students and postdocs at once, like an hour per week. And then obviously in between that, if they have any questions or issues, they can email me and I'll communicate with them that way. We have our meetings, obviously all online because of COVID. So we use Microsoft Teams primarily for that, but also Zoom. So the university has subscriptions to both of those platforms. And that's what we also use for like sharing files and things like OneDrive on Microsoft.
So obviously the pandemic has hit us all, but especially you, that you were starting a lab from zero. You explained a bit, but what do you think maybe was the most challenging part of it, to choose one thing out of?
Yeah, so I guess like perhaps starting a lab is always quite challenging, but and so I'm not sure what exactly is COVID specific and what is like just generally starting up a lab difficulties. But for me, I think because of COVID, like if COVID wasn't there, I would have gone into the lab much more myself to like look around to see where are we going to put things and what exactly do we need. But I mean, that wasn't possible, so because like obviously access is limited and you want to limit your contact with people. So I guess that slowed things down a little bit. But certainly starting up the group and then starting with like the basis of literature reviews for projects and all that, that hasn't been more challenging, I don't feel, because of COVID. If anything, because there's restriction on lab access, it's making researchers think a lot more about each specific experiment before they actually start into it. So I think we've put a lot of focus onto details of experimental plans and what we buy them to perform those experiments. So perhaps the background research has been extended longer than maybe it would have been, but I think that's quite a good thing, and we are at the stage now where we started experiments.
Thank you. Thanks for this. And building on your experience that you just explained us about, your multi-center experience on PhD and postdoc and moving around, do you think, do you believe a large group, maybe more than 30 people, is the best choice for a postdoc? Or do you think a smaller group would be a better choice? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think that the best choice would be independent of the number of people in the lab. I don't think that should dictate somebody's choice, because I've been in quite small lab and then like a larger lab, and honestly I've had like just as much interaction and feedback from my mentors in bigger labs than in the smaller labs. So I think it's definitely based on a lot of the organization and commitments, like other commitments as well, of the PI and how they structure their lab. So I think definitely it's lab specific. And I think the only way that a prospective postdoc would find that out is by communicating, so reaching out to members that are already in that lab. And usually people are so happy to give their advice and give their experience. So I think that that's the best way. So contact people that you see that are already in the lab if you're interested, and like they will give you like an honest appraisal.
Okay, thanks. So your transition from your second postdoc towards becoming a PI, what would you recommend? How did you manage to, finish off work and already start writing your own grants and trying to change your mindset into becoming a PI?
Yeah, so definitely, I think like starting as a PI, the shift is definitely focused, or the focus shifts from like doing the experiments to like facilitating the research. So that's like a big jump. But I think for me, there was no concrete, okay, now I'm finished all my research, like at the bench, and now I'm focusing on PI related things like grants and everything. I wrote 2 grants while I was a Global Marie Curie Fellowship in the US. And then so they very much allowed me to transition to academia. So I think like you kind of, and that's difficult for postdocs because you've like experiments to do, but then you're also trying to get some independent funding. So like it is very challenging, but for me, I found that was like the best way. Because also you must remember, like as a postdoc, you generally don't have teaching commitments or a lot of administration commitments that you'd have as a PI. So I don't think you necessarily have more time when you're a PI at all to write grants. So it is good to get that started earlier on, even if it's just to get the experience and the feedback. So like while I was in the US, I applied for an SFI grant, so that's Science Foundation Ireland, and that was a starting investigator research grant. And so they're brilliant because they're specifically aimed at transitioning people from, say, like postdoc stage to independent research stage. And so like they give funding for like a PhD, consumables, startup costs, things like that. But then they're also, there's requirements there to have mentorship in place and also have like named collaborators. So that's great because like, so I have my mentors from my postdocs as my like mentors on those and collaborators on that specific grant. So that was like a natural transition there. And then also, I also applied for an ERC starting grant at that time. And that's what I have in Galway now, along with the SFI grant. So they really, really allowed me to transition from, say, postdoc stage to independent research stage.
I'm not sure if Gianluca froze.
Sorry. Thanks for this. We have another question about your research work about dissemination. What do you think about dissemination? Do you have a plan in place? Are you using new tools? Are you using Twitter at all? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so a lot of my research funding is EU based. And so as such, I would target open access journals to disseminate our research. In fact, it's a prerequisite of a lot of that funding that comes with that. So generally publications is how we would disseminate our research. But also there's like websites like Cordis run by the EU. Also they like would highlight some EU funded projects. That's like a good way to like relay your research to other researchers and also to the public. I'm a big fan of Twitter as well. Like I will often find some really interesting articles on that myself. So like I do tend to also highlight when I publish a paper, or when my team publishes a paper as well, we'll put it on that.
And are you forced as well from some of these funding agencies to do any outreach for the more wider public?
So for the Marie Curie, yes, yeah, and for definitely some European funding, I am aware, and probably others too, there's like an outreach aspect. And so for those, like some like school students came to the university, there was like kind of open days, and also they'd have like they'd have done some research themselves, and then like they presented in poster format, and we'd ask them questions and give them feedback, things like that. But then also like so that was in the US, and then like back in France we had days where we would actually present our research to the public within the Natural History Museum. So we'd like set up stands, things like that. Then I know in Galway, there's a lot of activity, research activity going on, for example, with Soapbox Science, and we also have open days. And then we also, obviously not now with COVID, but usually we would visit secondary schools. So that's like the equivalent of, I guess, high school, or, you know, before you would transition to university stage, to explain what we do, like the research we do, and also the different courses available in the university.
Thanks. And you told us already about your grants and fellowship, especially about the Marie Curie. So we were really curious to hear what you wrote your proposal on the Marie Curie, how you did it, especially how you managed, and if that one was your first fellowship grant that you filed.
Sure. So no, the first one, the first funding, say independent funding, or like independent-esque funding, was a local French, it was a Pays de Loire funding in France. And so I got that shortly after I arrived for my postdoc in France. And so when I say semi-independent, that was like salary, funded my salary, but not like, say, my consumables, things like that. So the Marie Curie is different because it also gives you some funding for consumables and materials. And so after I got the regional French funding, I applied for an EMBO, and that wasn't successful. I applied for a Marie Curie, and that wasn't successful. I got very good feedback, however, from my first Marie Curie application. It was excellent. And I basically just addressed all those points and repackaged it, obviously updated it. I used preliminary data from the work that I was doing then, and then came up with new ideas, and then submitted it again, and that was successful.
So along those lines a little bit, how do you deal with failure, which happens very often in our daily work? And maybe if you could put in numbers, you know, how many grants one has to write until one becomes successful, or
sure,
what's this
yeah,
kind of game number?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's different for everybody, but for me, okay, I'll start kind of at your final question there, how many grants? I mean, for me, I applied for that EMBO, the Marie Curie that weren't, and then I got that the second Marie Curie. While I was on my postdoc, because I was like really involved in my research and I didn't really want to spend time away from the lab. I really love lab work, and I absolutely loved what I was doing there. I was like really specific and targeted in the grants I wrote there, and I only wrote the SFI and ERC. So really fortunately, they were both funded. So as I gathered, that's like not always the case. I'm very prepared for that going into academia, that like, you know, there's a lot of grants that don't get funded. But along the lines of your first question there, remind me the specifics of that.
As in, maybe you were quite lucky with a grant, so that's quite nice. But maybe with papers as well, how do you deal with failure? As in how?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So for me, to be honest, I didn't expect to get any of them. So maybe that was like, it was always such a pleasant surprise for me. Yeah, like, I mean, when I got the funding for the first global Marie Curie fellowship, I was obviously absolutely delighted. But I mean, I wasn't at all disappointed that I didn't get the year prior. I didn't expect it. Also, for the others, I was like really hopeful, but I wouldn't say that I expected them. So I guess, yeah, but I mean, I guess if somebody has like tried many times, it can definitely be disappointing. But what I would say is the main thing is to not take it personally. And the most important thing from unsuccessful grants is to look at the feedback and really scrutinize the feedback and use that as your best tool forward in order to facilitate the restructuring of your grant towards a successful grant. And obviously then, like, you know, when we get disappointments, it's good to just take a break, you know, and then get back to things.
Thanks, that was really helpful. And we have another question about, did you receive any support from your mentors in writing the proposals? Did you benefit from, of course, their vicinity and their help that they probably produced during your staying in US or in France, or even when you were a PhD?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think like mentorship has been integral to like my career progression. Absolutely. So from like attaining my postdoc that I really wanted, of course, then the mentorship that I got during my PhD really helped with that. And for me to like look at the areas I was interested in and all of that. And then also like throughout my PhD, I was still fortunate to still have the opportunity to contact my PhD advisor for advice on things even postdoc related. And so she was immensely helpful for that. And then also moving on then to my postdoc, I had huge support in France from Professor Leroll there. So like in terms of applying for research grants there, I used preliminary data. He was like hugely supportive of that, for example. And also in the US, and in the US in particular, of course, I had excellent mentorship there between Professor Mooney and also Professor Brickfield, but also the grants I was writing there. So like they became my mentors or my named collaborators on those grants. So that also helped me. I think in terms of facilitating and strengthening the grants, because like when you're applying specifically for startup funding, as I said earlier, a lot of these grants actually stipulate, so not the ERC, but for like the Science Foundation Ireland, because that was like a transition program, they actually stipulate that you have collaborators in place. And so I think that was important, but also for reviewing grants and giving you feedback. And I'd also like to point out that the mentorship I've gotten is not only solely from like official mentors. I think like in particular my peers, so my friends that I did my PhD with, and also my postdoc colleagues, like we always send each other our grant proposals and get feedback from each other. And even now, we still do that even with my friends that I did my PhD with. So I think that's hugely, and so by the end of one grant, I'll have feedback from a lot of sources. By the time I've collated all that, I've already addressed a lot of the holes that the reviewers will point out. So I think all of that together is really important, and support from each of those mentors, PhD advisors, and also, of course, your peers and your friends in academia.
Yeah, that's a very nice way of pointing out how important a strong network is, and it's never too early to start building your network, I guess. So we wanted now to go a bit more, change gears a bit to more of like your social life, family life, and how you manage this free time from work to with family and friends. Obviously now physical meetings are a bit more difficult, but yeah. What would be your like a standard day, or how would you coordinate?
Yeah. So yeah, things have changed a lot. Obviously my new position, but also lockdown. So actually my day is quite structured, and I wouldn't have been like that in the past, I guess. And so I might have thought that I'd be less structured during lockdown. But I think, like, you know, I'm living here with my husband. He really appreciates his free time. He respects his like work-life balance. So that helps me to also have like a time that I switch off at, and also like the weekends. So like usually say pre-COVID, in my free time, like we love to travel. Like I spend a lot of my free time traveling to different countries and exploring new places. And then I also love to spend time with my friends and my family. Of course, that's generally been all moved online now. unfortunately, we're in a 5-kilometer radius lockdown at the moment. So basically, anyone outside of my my unit here, it's all just online. And then also try to keep fit now and again. We love to hike, so that kind of goes hand in hand with traveling. And obviously now that's not possible either, but I try to get outside for walks and runs if I feel like I have the energy. And then of course, like a lot of Netflix during lockdown. So I guess, yeah, there's not so much interesting things to relay now. I'm like, yeah, like everybody else, kind of cooped up. But yeah, generally I spend my free time with like my friends and my family. And actually, so we've moved back to Ireland. So from being in France for like 5 years, England before that for a few years, and then the US for like 2.5 years. And we thought, like, you know, particularly family, because family are all back here, that we'd see them a lot more. But actually we moved into our apartment here like 2 days before lockdown. So we haven't really been able to avail of like that benefit so much, but we're looking forward to that.
Thank you. Now that you told us that you watch Netflix and you're a PI, now we can see that you guys are not superhuman. You guys are not superhuman. So that's pretty nice. Thanks. We have a question sort of related, but you kind of answer. But I want to probably relate to push it a little bit more. So you really told us that you like to travel a lot, and then you've been in so many countries.
Mm-hmm.
Have you find it difficult to move around, especially for family? We know that postdocs probably the best, well, the kind of the most common suggestion that they give us is to move lab from the PhD, just move away, move to another country, experience, and then maybe go back. But what about families and stuff? What do you think?
Yeah, so I would say that, of course, like it's brilliant to get experience in different countries and in different labs, but obviously that's not possible for everybody if they already have like family commitments and everything. So what I would say there is it's absolutely not necessary. I know people that have like very successful careers in academia and they haven't moved away for their postdocs. But the most important thing is that they have moved labs and also maybe expanded their area and their research focus and become independent from their PhD advisor. So I think like moving labs and gaining more experience outside of your PhD lab is like also very important in addition to like moving country. For me, I mean, I benefited from different cultures and also like even different lab cultures between each of those 4 countries now. Even if I wasn't in academia, I would have moved away. Like I love, like I knew I wanted to live in France even before I knew what research was about. We used to go to France on family holidays and I really enjoyed it. I loved like the food, the culture, the scenery. So even if I wasn't in research, I would have loved to move away. And what I think is that academia facilitated that for me. So I didn't move away because I felt like there's pressure to do this, and in order to achieve a certain goal in academia or in career, I should move away. So I can't really talk to like say like the best thing to do in that situation. I moved because I really, really wanted to move. And I was just so fortunate that this also gave me the benefit of seeing how different labs run and different groups conduct their research.
And then when you decided to write those SFI grants to go back to Ireland, was that always your plan? So did you always want to, you know, settle down and continue your career as an independent researcher back home?
So not particularly, to be honest. Like I absolutely knew I wanted to stay in research. I love research. So I knew I wanted to stay in research. It's funny because when we were in France, like I love France, I love living there. We could have absolutely settled down there and like stayed there. Then when I moved to the US, the exact same. I absolutely loved it there. I could see myself like there now still as well. But I guess like so I applied for that startup funding it was like at the time, the only grant I was applying for at that stage, it just came up. One of my friends back home sent me a notification about it, and I thought, wow, okay, that looks good. And also I thought, you know, it'll help me prepare for grants that I'm going to have to start applying for anyway. I was at the last year of eligibility for the ERC, so I absolutely had to apply that year. And so, okay, I'll apply for this grant. And so also simultaneously, my husband was given a job offer in Ireland while we were still in the US. And then I got the SFI grant. So everything kind of fell into place. And of course, we're so thrilled to be back home. And like the huge benefit of that, of course, is to see friends that we haven't seen in a while, and also family. Yeah, but as I said, that's been a bit derailed because of COVID, but obviously we're still very lucky. You know, we're getting on, we can both work, we're both working from home, so I don't want to complain in that regard either.
Yeah, it's very, very impressive as well how you managed like that both of you could have their own careers as well. Because
yeah, so I think that worked out well. Now, to be honest, like we weren't, so like, yeah, you're totally right. Like we were lucky, we're both, my husband also did like a PhD, not at the same time. And actually, there were instances where we had to change our plans a little bit. Like, for example, when I got my Marie Curie, for personal reasons there, I actually had delayed that by like the maximum time I was allowed to. And so that gave us the opportunity then to move to the US at the same time. And there was other instances like that where one of us would have, like, say, delayed something for a year or pivoted a little bit. But we were very fortunate. And actually, I guess that's why when we were looking towards the US, that's why Cambridge really stood out for us, because it has so many universities all in one place, also has like amazing biotech companies and things like that. So we thought that would be a brilliant place to start.
Great. And now kind of to finish, because we will air this hopefully on the 11th of February, which is the International Day for Women and Girls in STEM and in Science. And we wanted to ask you a bit if you, while growing up, you always know you wanted to be a scientist because you had some role models, or is the mentorship, for example, early in your PhD by Alicia McNamara, like a woman that is actually a very strong woman? Like, how do you think if it's important really to have role models that we can look up for, or what was a bit of your experience in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I always knew I was interested in science. So like even in school, my favorite subjects were like maths, chemistry, biology. Also, I loved technical drawing. So actually when it came to university, because of like those interests, I actually started undenominated engineering. Because I was unsure of like civil engineering because of the technical drawing aspects, or biomedical engineering because I love maths, I really like biology, and I thought they were like a really good mix for that. And so that's why, and then I chose the biomedical engineering stream. So I think for young girls, I think it's like really important that they explore all of those subjects as well, and like follow their interests. For me, absolutely, you know, as you said, Professor McNamara has been like a huge inspiration to me. I think like I don't think I really realized as well that, you know, I had a female mentor, and as a PhD supervisor, I didn't really actually think that, oh, in engineering, there aren't so many female PIs. I honestly didn't even notice. But as a female, like you can only be what you see around you. And like I had that, you know, from like a very early age. So I always thought that I could achieve the same as what men were achieving in that area. I never felt any different from the male PhD students in our group in terms of like what we could aspire to be. And I think absolutely having like a female role model really helped with that. So I think like more and more, there are more females going into science and engineering, and we should continue to encourage them as well.
you so much. It was
Thank you.
it was great talking to you, and I think a lot of the people viewing this will be inspired by all what you've explained and all your career path, and we really hope to see excellent work coming from your lab.
Thanks so much. It was great to discuss with you too.